Welcome. Dynamic. Okay, so Jared, you've been in Huffington Post, what, 6 months now?
6 months, yes.
And you were from, you came from Spotify.
Yes.
So give me your background on why it's a little bit non-traditional, I thought of it, as for running the Huffington Post.
So if you think of the Huffington Post, the heritage of the company has really been two things. The first has been as a publisher of leading content, but the second thing, and the thing that I've always found very attractive about the Huffington Post, is it's been a platform. I think the original DNA of the company is creating an opportunity for, at the time, bloggers and now contributors to have an outlet for their voices to be distributed across the world, has really been at the heart and soul of the Huffington Post. And indeed, if you think about Spotify as being a platform for artists to create their content and distribute it, in many respects, I see like very, very similar DNAs in a very different vertical. And
Sure.
so how does one scale Spotify is different than how does one scale Huffington Post in today's world, but I think the broader macro challenges are very, very similar.
So we'll talk about the macro challenges, but Huffington Post was born in a different era, right? I mean, when it started, search was the big distribution engine. Huffington Post did master what time does the Super Bowl start, and all other sort of SEO type things. And then distribution shifted to social platforms. What's the big challenge for distribution going forward for Huffington Post?
Well, if you take a step back and you think of the Huffington Post, I think this is true for all publishers, is you really have to have an identity and stand for something. And the mission of Huffington Post has really been around four things since the beginning: to inform, entertain, inspire, and empower. And that's manifested itself in three content verticals: news and information being the first. The second is lifestyle and healthy living. And the third is really around solutions, what's working in the world. And having a voice across those pillars has really been the nucleus. And then it's really about translating that voice into the different distribution models of the time. And I think what Huffington Post did extremely well, to your point, is nail SEO and figure out how to scale in a Google era, and got to tremendous scale. Now we're seeing a shift, to your point, on social platforms being the dominant mode of distribution. And what we're doing is taking the formula that we use to scale on SEO, which is really around our voice, around our mission, and around our data analytics, to apply that to the way in which you can actually gain distribution on Facebook. And because we've had a DNA in those three things, we've been able to translate those things into social distribution as well.
So how does the Huffington Post maintain that differentiation and that distinct identity when it's publishing like thousands and thousands of articles? I mean, is there a need to focus at some point and not do some things in order not to be diluted and to be another portal?
It's a great question. When you're small, you always think like, hey, when I get to, like, my number one goal in life is to get to as much scale as possible, because that's where the revenue comes, that's when investors come, and that's what I really want to do. And as you get to a point of like tremendous scale, you say, oh, I have the exact opposite problem, which is like, I'm so broad, am I actually culturally authentic and relevant to my audiences, and how do you do that? And I think one of the things that Huffington Post has done very well over its first 10 years, and what we're indeed doing right now, is kind of shifting to what I was alluding to earlier, is like three content pillars, and saying like, here are the pillars that we really have to own and nail.
So does that mean you pull back on certain things?
I think it's to really focus on three things, and where you can add value to the world from an editorial and content perspective, you should, and where you can't, you won't. So one example is in news and politics, which has been a category that Huffington Post has always been strong, and we continue to be strong in. Our view is like, we no longer want to just cover the news in the way that everyone else covers the news. News, to some extent, is commoditized. And when you have our scale, just telling what's happening in the world is not really meaningful to anyone in the world. What we have to do is add value. So how do we actually talk about the stories of today in a way that's differentiated and can add value to people's lives? And so for us, it's around the three content pillars that we stand for, and only covering stuff where we can add something unique to it. And by definition, where we can't, we won't do it. And what we will do is, because we still have tremendous scale on our owned and operated properties, we will still link out, we will still refer people to our competitors' stories where they're adding value. And so we can still create an ecosystem where we add value, we'll put our stuff up, and when we don't add value, we'll put other people's stuff up.
Is the race to scale sort of over? I mean, we have now giant, I mean, Huffington Post is one of the giants, BuzzFeed, and there's others that have grown to tremendous scale. And there's a new crop that are trying to get to that scale. I just wonder, we had Justin Smith here yesterday talking a lot about focus and saying that the scramble to scale was a mistake for a lot of publishers.
I think the most important thing to do is to stay culturally relevant and authentic to the audiences that you're attracting. And indeed, when you are very focused and you have like a very, very tight purpose in the world and you can attract your audiences there, that's the best place to be because that can be very valuable. The challenge that occurs is once you sort of own that audience in a way that's authentic and you start either adding other verticals or trying to expand that vertical beyond that, either because you need scale from a revenue perspective or you need scale because your investors are asking for it, you can start diluting yourself, diluting your brand, or pushing yourself into areas where you don't have a core competency. And then all of a sudden you start diluting the value of your company. And so I don't think scale in and of itself is a good thing or a bad thing. I think the most important thing is to do it in a way that's measured such that you can like retain your voice and identity in today's world.
So is there a feeling in Huffington Post of people having BuzzFeed envy?
I don't think so at all.
Because they sort of, you know, the conversation shifted. Like everyone talked about Huffington Post for a long time. And you know how the attention goes. And then it was all BuzzFeed. That the notion was Huffington Post mastered a search era and BuzzFeed mastered a social and platforms era.
I think BuzzFeed and many other companies do a lot of things right. But we're less focused on what they're doing and more focused on what we're doing. And I think for us, like staying very true to what our values are and being authentic there matters the most. So for example, whereas BuzzFeed, I think have a lot of great entertainment content. That's like, and you know, when people think of like the kind of cats and skateboards model as a way to sort of nail social, that's a space that we won't play in because while that can be great for metrics, it could be great for social, it's just not authentic to our voice. And so we obviously look at how they think about data and analytics, and data and analytics is really, really important to what they do and to what we do, but how we apply that through our content lens is very, very different.
So what's the biggest monetization challenge that you face at operating a business at such a big scale in such a fast-changing environment?
Well, look, the world, and I think this conference has talked a lot about this over the past few days, is we're now in an era where companies are less focused around building their owned and operated properties where they expect audiences to show up to their website or to show up to their app. It's very, very, very difficult to do. Huffington Post has done that extraordinarily well, and I would argue better than anyone. And there's a very clear monetization model associated with that.
Yeah, you bring people to the site, you show them ads.
You show them ads, you can do like great sponsorships,
Yeah.
premium things, and that model has worked and it's been tremendously successful. As the world shifts towards platforms, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Snapchat, and others, and those monetization models are a lot more infant. And so the question that we face, and I think all publishers face, is how far into the deep end do you jump and how quickly do you do that? Because until those monetization models fully catch up, it's not such a clear choice.
Right. So Kim Lau was here from The Atlantic, and she spoke about, I think they're pushing about 98% of their content to Facebook. Now, you guys create, I don't know what, like 10,000 articles a month, something like that. So I'm not sure if you would push all of them to Facebook or you're just experimenting.
Well, we have a very strong relationship with Facebook, and we do push a lot of content there. The place that we've been most experimental and where we've placed a really big bet on is specifically around video. We've been transitioning and innovating on our video strategy, and one thing that we've really started to do over the past few months is start producing a different kind of content that's evolved from the traditional HuffPost content, which is short-form video, that's authentic to our voice and plays on Facebook. And so our big bet on Facebook has really been around those kinds of video initiatives, and to some extent it's different content that we'll
But not as much around instant articles?
We've been spending a lot of time in instant articles too, And what we find is instant articles does work from an audience perspective. It does work from an engagement perspective. And the monetization models are starting to catch up, but are still
But they're
further
behind.
But they are behind.
So like how much behind? Like there's 10% behind and then there's 50% behind.
I think they're still experimenting with what formats can play, and video formats, which they just announced very, very recently. Those monetize better than other forms of ad units, and so they're behind, but they're catching up.
Okay. How about Snapchat? You're not on Discover. Is that something that you'd like?
I think Snapchat's a very interesting platform, and the reason why it's interesting is because they've done a remarkable job of attracting really big audiences, particularly in the millennial generation, and the kinds of content experiences that you can find on Snapchat are really unlike those that you find on other platforms. And so I think as a media and technology company, as an experimental company, of course we'd like to play on their platform.
So
as
you
well.
already have a team creating Snapchat content?
Yeah, we are focused on creating content for Snapchat.
Okay. How about video? Do you have any sort of metrics as far as how much video has become as a percentage of the content you create?
It's really hard to say, but I would say it's at least 50% and growing. What's very clear is that beyond the shift that we've alluded to from sort of a Google world to a Facebook world, we've also seen a massive shift towards mobile. And in the mobile environment, video translates more to audiences than the written word. And so I think all publishers and all content creators are really starting to embrace video in a very authentic way. We are too. And so what we are doing now at the Huffington Post is really three things. The first is with respect to our kind of core newsroom and how we just produce content, we are now embedding video into sort of the core operations, and that will translate both on our owned and operated properties as well as we distribute to other platforms. But beyond that, we've also have a dedicated video team who are just out creating video-first content, whereas it used to be video was a supplement to other content we're creating. It's now video is actually leading the way, and I think that kind of shift will continue to occur.
And so where is the distribution for that video? Is it as far as the different platforms, including your own platform?
Sure. So one thing to note is one of the things that the Huffington Post has done over the course of its 10-year history is built a really scaled platform ourselves.
Right.
And so I think
So
that
a lot of people end up on your site.
we still have hundreds of millions of people who end up on our site. So it's not a small audience, it's a big audience. And so first and foremost, we think about how do we continue to create a rich, vibrant ecosystem and platform on our own properties. And Huffington Post is also situated within a corporate structure where we're within AOL and within Verizon, so we have the opportunity to also publish and distribute content within the larger corporate portfolio. So that's the first place. But it is clear that Facebook has become if not the most important, one of the most important platforms where content gets distributed. And YouTube still plays a very important role. And then
But Facebook is nearly equal as far as when you're talking about video strategy now?
Yeah, I think so. And part of it is because I think, and I think many of the new entrants in the space have done this, it's at this point, just because I think the Facebook video ecosystem is newer than the YouTube video ecosystem, people are, and their models are evolving more rapidly. People are figuring out ways to scale Facebook audiences right now, whereas the YouTube model, people have done that, the MCNs have come and they've been built. It's very, very hard to start from a ground start to sprinting on YouTube today.
Yeah. How about TV? Do you want to do TV?
TV is potentially interesting. It's not part of our short-term or sort of mid-term strategy. So obviously there's other players in the space like Vice who are experimenting there, and we're watching what happens there. But it's not a place that we're spending our time focusing on right now.
What were the sort of internal lessons from Huffington Post Live? Because that was a very ambitious initiative. I'm not sure if it was a smashing success, but it was ambitious. And I think it was ahead of its time if you look at what's going on with Facebook Live video.
Sure. So I think we would think of HuffPost Live as a success. The reason for it is, I think in order to stay relevant in today's world, you have to experiment, you have to innovate, and you have to try different things. And I think where companies struggle is by only making safe bets or following the path of leaders in the space. And I think to your point, HuffPost Live was very much ahead of its time. But what it stood for, and like the ultimate DNA of HuffPost Live, was creating a platform to have like video conversation about topics that people care about. And I think that DNA holds true, and we're seeing with Facebook Live, with what YouTube's doing, with what Periscope's doing, the idea of live and the idea of conversation or live events is very much taking off right now, just in a different format. And so where we're evolving HuffPost Live is being from a sort of linear-based model towards a more segmented, topical model on those other platforms, and that's where we're playing right now.
So when you look at the big shifts going on in the publishing landscape, having come from Spotify, do you think that a Spotify-like model can work well with publishing?
I think it's much, much more difficult in publishing, in part because I think the barriers to entry, if you just take a step back and think about it from a kind of like economics 101 perspective, the barriers to entry in the music space are very, very high, because to get into the space, you have to secure very, very expensive license rights from the music companies. In publishing, the startup costs are much lower. The challenge is really around distribution. And so that's number one. And number two is I think consumers are used to free and not paying, particularly in a digital world. And so the idea of getting paid subscription, I think it can work if you add very, very specific added value, but to work at the scale of something like an Apple or Spotify, I think it's much more challenging.
So Huffington Post is not, like on the roadmap, is not to get even just a small percentage of people to take out their credit card and pay for some kind of content?
I think the idea of, I think all companies at a certain level of scale think about how one can diversify the revenue. And whether it's subscription, whether it's transactions, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's live events, like whether it's conferences, I think you always have to think about how to do that. But it's not in the short-term strategy for
Okay,
us.
good. Don't do a publishing conference. I want to open it up to questions. Has everyone been at the oxygen bar? Anyone? Okay, wait, we have one over here.
I was curious how you select your market for international expansions.
Okay.
So are you selecting mature market where advertising potential is there, or are you choosing emerging market with a 10-year, 20-year vision?
It's a great question. So we are in 15 markets around the world currently. We are expanding that very rapidly. So for example, we will be launching in Mexico in the next couple months, and on the roadmap is also tackling other markets in Europe, Asia, and South America. So our goal is to be in many markets around the world, and ideally we'd get to 50 markets over the next couple years. And the idea for that is really to go to markets where we think we can add value just from a content perspective. So for example, we recently struck a partnership with WeChat in China. And in order to offer a different form of content on that platform than I think what currently exists there. And so that's an example where we're not setting up a company, for example, in China, but we're working with other established companies there. But in other parts of the world, like Mexico, where we will be launching in the next few months, we will be setting up like a HuffPost operation in Mexico and go there.
Do you have local partners in a lot of these?
Yeah, so
right?
the model for our international expansion historically has been not to go alone. That we've been partnering with traditionally big media companies who understand the market, who have similar values to us, and who can bring elements to the table, such as sales teams, such as distribution, and we work together in partnership in those markets. As we continue to evolve to and expand to other markets, we'll continue to do it in partnership, like our existing models, but we also do it in different ways, such as the distribution deal that I just mentioned with WeChat, and potentially in some markets go it alone.
Okay. Anyone else? Last chance. Oh, there's one over here. One over here. Coming in droves now, Jared.
Hey, Jared. Congratulations. I'm straight ahead of you. Straight ahead of you. Here
There
we
you
go.
are.
Yeah.
Congratulations on
Congratulations on the WeChat deal. That's great.
Thank you.
Very interesting, given the fact that you're a Western news brand, Western politics brand, right, going into China, which has been a challenge for the likes of Bloomberg, who I work for, like for New York Times, et cetera. Can you talk through some of the challenges around that and how you overcame that?
Sure. So as I mentioned, one of the things that we've really tried to do is focus on 3 different editorial pillars, one of them being news and information and politics. And I think that is core to our brand, particularly in this country. But in some of the other countries, particularly in Asia, our brand really resonates, but it resonates less in that category. And for example, in WeChat, we are not playing in that category altogether. The other 2 categories around our lifestyle, what's working, and solutions in the world are categories that we are playing in and making big investments there. And so that's how we're specifically tackling sort of the content strategy in China and other places.
Okay. Wait, was there another one? Okay. We're actually out of time anyway. Jared, thank you so
great.
much.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much.
it. It's a pleasure. Okay.